James Long. As of 4 days ago, at the time of recording, I am an assistant teaching professor at Rice. But I've been at Rice for 2 full years now in an instructor role. So I'm about to start my 3rd year of teaching at Rice.
What sort of courses do you teach at what level?
Forgot to pause last time. So I teach mostly lab courses from the sophomore to senior level. So at the sophomore level, I teach a physiology lab course using BioPack software and hardware. At the junior level, I teach an instrumentation lab. So we work, again, with instrumentation with the NI Elvis platform and LabVIEW. And then at the senior level, I teach a microcontrollers lab, mainly in Arduino. And I also teach a transport lecture. Again, that's senior level. So the way I think about setting realistic expectations, I think one of the benefits I have teaching at Rice is that I see the same students every single time. So when I teach a lab course, it's not like 50% of all the students, it's all the students in that year. And so by the time they get to my senior level courses, they've had me at least 2 times. So they kind of know the way things are run. But in terms of like setting expectations, from the get-go, when in the sophomore year, I think if you look at my course reviews, students will say I'm pretty strict. I'm kind of a stickler for everything, from like, how the lab reports are formatted, to, how they write about like the biology, and how they explain things. And I'll be honest, like I'm pretty strict about things like, being late to lab as well. And so that's all part of trying to kind of, get students out of the mindset of, I think in high school, sometimes some of this stuff slides a little bit. But if we look at our jobs as preparing them for whatever comes after college, like jobs, grad school, whatever, we kind of have to get to that level of professionality. So I take that pretty seriously. And so for some students in the sophomore year, that's kind of a shock. I don't know if they've necessarily had that, especially like coming off of freshman year. Some of those labs, at least at Rice, they're taught by graduate TAs who, for some reason or other might not feel as comfortable being strict, but I am pretty comfortable being strict. So I set those expectations from the sophomore year, and then going into junior and then senior year, they kind of get it after that. So again, like it's a huge advantage to be able to teach a whole cohort of students year after year. I mean, from the sophomore to junior level, like that's back-to-back semesters. So it's the spring semester sophomore year to fall semester junior year. So they basically get a break in the summer from me, and then they see me write again. So, but I think that really helps with them understanding like what I expect of them and the level of work and precision I really want to see from them. The way I try to connect with my students is I just try to communicate with them as much as possible. So going back to the idea of being really strict with them, I think I've found over the last 2 years, like if I'm just honest about why these policies exist and what I'm really trying to develop them for, they become a little bit more amenable to the strict policies. They don't love it. I mean, I feel like every semester I get some course review that's like, oh, Dr. Long is like way too strict about being on time. But on the very first day of class, I always tell them, you go get a job. There are some jobs where it doesn't matter if you're a minute late. I've had positions like that where, yeah, like 1 minute late, it's not that big of a deal. But there are also jobs where if you're 1 minute late, that's a huge deal. And so whether, you have a lot of leniency or you have no leniency, I'd rather you just be prepared for a case where you have limited leniency, and then you can kind of adjust from there rather than approaching anything from, oh, I have unlimited leniency. The other thing is also, I try to make the penalties in my strict policies not that harsh. It's just more so like I need students to kind of see, okay, I noticed that you were late, or I noticed like in your lab report you missed this thing. And so by writing something in there, they know, okay, I have to improve on that for next time. And so, and again, I explained to them like, the penalty is not intended to ruin your grade. Like I'm not trying to take an A-level student to a B-level student just because they were late a couple of times. That's not the point of it at all. But it's just for them to just kind of notice that, yeah, like when you show up late, like some of these penalties start to stack up a little bit. and I just want them to be aware of it. That kind of brings me to um, some grading things that I'm working on, and maybe this is like a later question, but it's all a little bit related. I am experimenting with uh, a new like regrading and resubmission policy that hadn't existed in the courses before I got to Rice. And the gist of it is I allow students whenever they do any kind of written assignment to, once they get their grade back, to resubmit for basically all of their points back. And what I'm finding is, I communicate with the students why this exists. Basically, it's really, really difficult to submit perfect work the first time around. And just as important as it is to submit high quality work, it's also important to take feedback and develop an intuition for what constitutes high quality work. And I really want students to develop their own internal compass for what that high quality work looks like. And so with this regrade and resubmission policy, students do get pretty high grades in my class, but that's also because they go through a revision process for every single writing assignment that they turn in. And I think it's also helping them solidify some of the concepts we cover in class because, a lot of lab courses, you do kind of weekly modules. And so you do 1 week, and unless like the next modules build on top of it, you don't necessarily revisit the material. And so sometimes you don't know like what's going to be retained, but just making them see the material again, or if they're reformatting a figure or doing some data reprocessing, I think that is kind of solidifying some of the concepts from early in the semester so that if it comes back up late in the semester or there's something similar to it, I think students are they're finding it easier to recall that information. So as far as this work goes, I'm kind of early in the data analysis process. I have some like surveys from students, but the attitudes from students are pretty positive. I mean, they're getting better grades, so I kind of expected that. But I also am finding like their writing quality is going up, and I'm finding that with limited specific feedback, they are developing a good sense of what's a high quality figure, or how do you write about this circuit concisely without rambling on and on with all these equations and unnecessary detail. So I'm pretty happy with how that's going so far. It definitely increases the workload on students. And that's another thing that I get in my course reviews is like it's a lot of writing. But I do think that when I took over some of these courses as I was kind of ramping up my full workload here at Rice, I cut out some of the other assignments in the course because my personal opinion is like, especially in the lab course, at Rice, our lecture courses are 3 credit hours, lab courses are 1 credit hour. So like the expectations for work are a little bit lower in lab courses. And you can't, it's just really difficult to do everything well. Like you can't teach them everything under the sun for the lab course. And so I kind of made it my personal goal to help with their technical writing. There's a lot of research going into basically technical writing being a barrier to a lot of students from, um, for like underrepresented minorities, women in engineering. It's just a really, really easy way to get their communication to the level that is expected of any engineering graduate. And it kind of closes some of these equity gaps that exist, especially in engineering. And so I really wanted communication to be something that every single student gets out of my class. And so in doing so, in cutting some of these other assignments that I don't think contribute to that final goal and emphasizing the writing part, at least like, I think overall it is more work than the course was before I took it over. But at least it's kind of like all in the same area of focus. So students aren't like kind of switching between different modes of thinking. They're really focused on the writing perspective outside of class. The biggest drawback actually, so anyways, like students, it's more work for students, but I think they kind of accept it. I've gotten pretty good feedback from students saying like, it's more work, but we feel ourselves improving and it's like valuable. The biggest drawback, honestly, is not students complaining about work. It's a lot of work for me because I basically have to grade everything twice. And it's definitely been a challenge trying to figure out what kind of feedback do I leave in the first draft to make sure like they're actually building that intuition. So starting out, I had like really detailed rubrics because when you're being trained in teaching, you're like, oh, have detailed rubrics, let students know exactly what you're looking for. And I do believe in setting good expectations and clear expectations. But if you have rubrics for literally every single point you're going to take off, you're not really teaching students to build an intuition for what's good technical writing. You're actually just teaching students to fill out a checklist. And these checklists do not exist after undergrad, or sometimes in grad school, but after grad school, definitely these checklists don't exist. And so I've had to kind of figure out what is the language I want to use that's going to encourage them to improve, while still being vague enough where like they have to do some more thinking on their own in the revision. So in the past, maybe if they turned in a plot that they didn't label their axes, I would write, label your axes or like units or whatever. And then they get really good at looking at a plot and be like, okay, here's the exact thing I need to fix. And so now I leave comments along the lines of not descriptive enough. And that's pretty vague, and students don't like that. But as the semester goes on, when I write not descriptive enough, sometimes they're making improvements that I didn't even expect them to make, but it's because they're feeling out what they think makes for a good plot. And I think that's really wonderful because everyone kind of has their style for data representation. And I think this is really allowing students to do that for themselves in a pretty low stakes environment. So primarily my scholarly work is around this regrading resubmission, but the specific focus of the surveys is to examine how it affects student motivation. So I'm using a modified instrument from another engineering study to look into, oh, I'm sorry, it's not engineering, it's actually from medical school. But it's just to look at how different types of assignments affect student motivation, their desire to stay in the field and also complete like specific tracks within that field. So I thought that would make sense for something like biomedical engineering, where it's a pretty broad field. There's a bunch of different subfields you can go into. So I just wanted to see, like, with these different lab courses that I teach, am I reinforcing their interest in it, or am I reinforcing maybe other motivations? So this will be an interesting data set to look into. Again, I haven't completely looked through all of it. It's a lot of data, but hang on. Oh yeah, so in terms of the scholarly activity, I'm hoping to kind of see not only how the regrading policy affects student motivation, but also how it's activating different levels of Bloom's taxonomy too. So I had done some scholarly work when I was a grad student at Duke with Ann Satterback, looking into how problem-based learning activates different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And so for anyone who's not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it's basically a hierarchy of learning where like the lowest level is like very base level learning, like remembering and understanding concepts, moving on to like middle levels, which are applying and analyzing whatever material you've learned or remembered. And then the top levels are really what we're striving for, which is like the ability to evaluate or create new information. Synthesizing new information, or assessing the quality of something in like a design environment, for instance. And so in lab courses, because they're so hands-on, you kind of have to cover the entirety of the taxonomy. You have to learn how to actually like collect the data and what you're actually looking at. But then with that data, as we all know, as we're all scientists, like we can see like you can do everything from redesigning an experiment with from the data that you collect to like evaluating the goodness of the data, or like that's the practice of data collection too. So there's so many different ways for a student to learn in lab environments. And I just kind of want to see, in my courses, what levels am I activating? And when we're doing the regrading and resubmitting, and students are kind of seeing that material again and, really thinking about how they want to communicate it, is that like a middle level, a high level, or just a low level state of learning? So that part will be interesting to see how students respond to that. I suspect it's going to be a bit of a spread. I'm sure some students get a lot out of the resubmission because maybe like they're getting feedback and having this opportunity to revise for the first time. And maybe some students, I mean, we all know we have like 5 to 10% of students, they're just really good students. And so they might not be getting a whole lot out of this either. So I'll be interested to see what the data looks like. I think the biggest thing that the BEEC community can do is get involved in the mentorship program that Jen Light at Ohio State and I started through the ASWE BED community. And really the reason why I was motivated to do that, and I'm going to use this time to kind of like shout out all the people who've helped me along the way, is because like, anyone who kind of gets to like my position, which is like a young faculty position, is you had a lot of people help you along the way who like took chances on you. So like, I just want to thank Ann Satterback at Duke for being my primary mentor really in the teaching space. I just learned so much from her, and I'm really grateful for all the opportunities that she gave me. Really want to thank my colleagues at Rice, Sabia Abadi, Rana Ramos, and Bella Gossin for supporting me, especially like, being new to teaching and helping me get comfortable with the system and with the students. And then people at other universities really with helping with my professional development. Again, Jen Light at Ohio State, also Rachel Childers at Ohio State, and then Cameron Kim and Libby Buchholz at Duke, for just being really great people and supportive people and answering just whatever question I have about teaching. And so having these mentors has meant a lot to me. And I think as far as like the B community goes, if you're young faculty like myself, like seeking out people like this every opportunity you can is just going to help your career so much more. And I'm still always trying to find new role models. I mean, I met Alexis through like the mentorship program, and he's helped me a lot in the last few months too. And I really hope to just kind of keep finding people who can help, and maybe one day down the road, like I can be that for someone else too. I really just can't stress how important mentorship is to my career, and hopefully I can make that contribute back to the community in that way later.